You've seen the pictures, right? Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. But while all the media chaos has been swirling around, a much deeper and frankly more disturbing story has been forming right under our noses. A story that most people have completely missed. So today, we're going to connect the dots that have been hiding in plain sight. And just to be clear, we're not here to rehash old news. This is about linking together new pieces of information that, according to the sources for this explainer, paint a really troubling picture about the integrity of our entire justice system. And that's really the core question, isn't it? This isn't some story about a single, dramatic bombshell. Nope. This is about connecting several very disturbing facts that, when you line them up, suggest something has gone terribly, terribly wrong.
So, the source we're looking at lays all this out as 3 separate threads. Now, on their own, you might just shrug them off. But when you start to weave them together, well, that's when a very clear pattern starts to show.
Okay, so it all kicks off with a document that the House Oversight Committee released. It's just one page from Jeffrey Epstein's 2003 birthday book. And on it, there's a typed note seemingly signed by Donald Trump.
Just a nice little birthday wish, right? Maybe. But let's be real, given everything we now know about Epstein's horrifying sex trafficking ring, a phrase like "another wonderful secret," well, it suddenly sounds incredibly chilling. The source argues this little note implies a relationship built on something hidden, something much deeper than just a couple of guys who knew each other from the social scene. Now, it is absolutely essential to point out that Trump has flatly denied the note is authentic, saying it's not his handwriting and not his signature.
Now for the second thread. While everyone's attention was on things like that note, something way more significant was happening quietly, behind the scenes inside the Department of Justice.
So get this. The DOJ under the Trump administration officially killed its investigation into Epstein's co-conspirators. The official memo basically said, nothing to see here, no credible evidence. But whistleblowers cited by our source say that's just not true. They claim prosecutors in New York had already interviewed around 50 survivors and had active leads on at least 20 potential accomplices. And then, all of a sudden, the case gets yanked from them and shut down.
And that brings us to the third and final thread, Ghislaine Maxwell. As Epstein's right-hand woman and convicted accomplice, she is one of the very few people on the planet who knows the whole, unfiltered truth about this entire network.
Whistleblower reports claim Maxwell's getting some pretty special treatment in prison and was even getting ready to ask for her sentence to be commuted. You really have to ask yourself, why would the one person who holds all the keys to the kingdom be in a position for a potential early release?
Okay, let's just pause and take a step back. We've looked at these 3 things individually. The real power in this argument, though, comes when you put them all together and see the pattern that takes shape.
Let's just walk through the sequence. First, you have a note that hints at shared secrets. Then, the federal investigation into those very secrets gets mysteriously shut down. And finally, the one person who knows everything is reportedly getting set up for a deal. The source argues that this isn't just a series of coincidences. This looks like the blueprint for a cover-up. And this alleged pattern, well, it leads to a much bigger argument about the tactics that were used and what it really means when the massive power of the government is used not for justice, but for protection. So how could something this big happen without more people noticing? Well, according to the source, it was all happening under the cover of a political strategy called flooding the zone. The idea is pretty simple, actually. You create so much noise, so many different controversies every single day that the public just gets worn out. We become exhausted. And in that fog of exhaustion, a really complex story, like the shutdown of a federal investigation, can slide by virtually unseen.
The source calls what happened next the shell game. So publicly, there were all these big promises to expose the Epstein client list, which got supporters fired up for accountability. But privately, while everyone was looking over there, the real investigation, the one with prosecutors and evidence, was being quietly killed. And then, once it was dead and buried, the whole idea of a list was dismissed as a hoax, which gave them the perfect cover.
You know, this whole thing raises some really serious national security issues. If any leader has a past that's tangled up with someone like Epstein, they become incredibly vulnerable. Foreign intelligence agencies, they live for this kind of stuff. It's the ultimate blackmail material. It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Are big decisions being made for the good of the country? Are they being made out of personal fear?
But beyond all the politics and the high-stakes power moves, the source argues that the most devastating part of this story is the impact it had on the human beings right at the center of it all.
I mean, just think about this for a second. Nearly 50 survivors, people who had already been failed by the system once before, somehow found the incredible courage to come forward again. They relived their trauma, they cooperated with prosecutors, all because they believed that this time it would finally be different.
And what happened? This quote from the source material just hits you right in the gut. Their testimony was weaponized and discarded. Their stories were used to make political promises, but the moment the investigation got a little too inconvenient, it was shut down, and their credibility was questioned to justify it all.
And the source makes it clear that this betrayal goes even further. It was also a betrayal of the supporters who were promised accountability. Their genuine desire to see justice done was used as a political shield to hide what was really happening. And then, they were pretty much dismissed for believing the very promises they were told.
So after connecting all these pieces, what's the big takeaway here? What is truly at stake according to the argument that we've just laid out?
Okay, let's just run through it all one last time. You have a note hinting at dark secrets, you have a federal investigation that gets shut down, you have the key witness being positioned for a deal. The source argues that all of this points to one conclusion. The Department of Justice was used not for justice, but for protection.
What we've walked through today is one source's detailed step-by-step argument for a cover-up. The central claim is that the full, immense power of the United States government was used not to uncover the truth about Epstein's network, but to bury it forever.
And really, that leaves us all with one final, profound question. This isn't just about one case or one person. It's about the rule of law itself. Because if the system can be bent and manipulated to protect the powerful, it forces all of us to ask, who is justice really for?